Three survival horror games, three blonde teenage protagonists, three legacies of being underrated, overpriced, and very hard to find, all of them on PS2. Welcome to week 3 of Pliktober, and today we're going to be talking about the most mysterious and gatekeepy game of this trio, Rule of Rose. Rule of Rose was developed by Punchline and released in 2006, although in North America it was released later on by Atlas of all companies. A couple notable names were Buji Ishikawa, who was the director, Noriyuki Boda, who was the producer, and the composer was Yutaka Minobe. Rule of Rose had a small team of only 25 developers. The only other game I could really find that they worked on before this was Tulip, which in of itself is a cult classic that's very hard to find. The team had a desire to make a more psychologically based horror game that was placed on the framework of Resident Evil. Originally, the game was supposed to be about a small boy abducted by a man onto an airship, where ghosts of previous victims would help the boy try to escape. This topic was deemed too dangerous. So the focus shifted to how adults and children's misunderstandings of one another could be terrifying, and how children would treat adults if they were given power over them. This game had poor reception due to the combat and the substanceless gameplay and narrative. Some of this I agree with, some of this I could not disagree with more. The premise of Rule of Rose is basically that you're playing as a 19-year-old girl called Jennifer, who follows a wandering boy to this orphanage on a lonely bus trip one night, but wakes up after being kidnapped by children on this really strange airship where things just get worse and worse for Jennifer. She has to try to find out why she's here, what's going up with this really weird kids club that they call the Aristocrats Club, and try to find whatever help she can to survive this. Now, the gameplay is interesting because it's part Silent Hill and part Haunting Ground. It's Silent Hill in the sense of the way the cameras and the combat works, as well as how a lot of the different puzzles and objectives work. You're going to be spending a lot of time looking for a certain item to unlock a certain area or to generally progress, with enemies and other things just being more so roadblocks rather than core gameplay. You are better off running past a lot of the enemies in the game you do not have to fight. But then the other half, much more similar to Haunting Ground, is working together with a canine companion. Now, here you have a dog named Brown. Brown does not fight for you, and he doesn't really solve puzzles for you. What Brown is basically a living nav point. So you can have him sniff out certain items, and he will tell you where objectives are, where healing items are, or where other items of interest are. So for the exploration, Brown is the key, but for the combat and for the puzzles, it's really up to Jennifer. Now this game has a decent chunk of unlockables, a lot of which I still have to get as I've only recently just beaten this game. But there's an unlockable costume that turns Jennifer and Brown into a octopus and dog, as well as an outfit that turns Brown into a sentient chair. So, is this scary? Honestly, I never really was scared while playing Rule of Rose. It can be frustrating, it can be intriguing, it can be dead right bad, and it can be amazing. But I never really found this to be a scary game. It's definitely not like Silent Hill 3 where I'm terrified all the time, and it's not even really like Haunting Ground where I am thrilled all the time. However, it is fun. When this game is going right, when it's using good level design, pacing, and not forcing you to experience the game's weaknesses, i.e. the combat, it's a really fun game to play. However, there are multiple sections, especially towards the end of the game, that are downright awful. When you have forced combat sections against non-boss fight type enemies, this game is straight up bad. However, it's not enough to tear away the parts of the game that I really love. One of which is the vibes. Now, this isn't going to be the ethereal, I am depressed Silent Hill vibes, and it's not going to be the Capcom Castle vibes. Instead, you're getting vibes that are very similar to something like Alice Madness Returns, something that's very kind of Victorian, British, kind of early postmodern world sort of thing. Pre-World War II, violins, neatly dressed children, intense British accents, a very large emphasis on social hierarchy. There are definitely vibes here to have, and if you're into anything Victorian, if you're into anything like Alice Madness Returns, if you're into that kind of like traditional British horror, this is definitely a vibe in of itself. In regards to its replayability, I have to say yes and no, because on the one hand, again, there are parts that are really fun to play through. There are a lot of costumes to unlock, and weapons to unlock to, mess around with. There's multiple endings. However, there are parts of this game that made me never want to play it again. So, whether or not it's replayable is up to whether or not you're willing to really take your time with this game and grind for recovery items for later on in the game when you're forced down gauntlet after gauntlet of fighting. Is it worth the price? Absolutely fucking not. Now you see, I didn't mess around and spend thousands of dollars on this game because that is ridiculous, and the fact that anyone is selling this game at this price, the whole controversy around its release and, having a limited release in the West aside, or no, even with that included, there is no reason a video game should be thousands of dollars. So instead what I did was buy a Japanese PS2 and get Rule of Rose as a Japanese copy for, about a couple $100. I think I got it for around, with shipping included, $400. Still very expensive, and for a lot of people this is definitely a better game to emulate. And this is the first time I'm actually going to tell you that the best way to play this game is indeed to emulate. Because even on a Japanese PS2, this game is very dark. Or PS2 in general, not Japanese. The Japanese part comes in the fact that there's a lot of reading to do in this game, so I had to watch a guide while I was playing the game in order to understand everything I was reading. The voice acting and everything is in English, however, it's still a roadblock. But the real issue with this game on PS2 is that it's really fucking dark. So you're watching this one part here, where it's kind of like this gauntlet of fighting, but you have to walk a lot through these hallways using Brown to navigate. But here's the thing, for you it looks like this, but for me it looked like this. So that was definitely something that hampered it. And when you consider the outstandingly ridiculous price for this game, I cannot in good faith tell you that any copy of this is worthy of the price. So definitely, even though I'm not a PC guy, even though I'm not interested in emulation, even though I'm a freak and I bought this because I needed to have a physical copy, I'm telling you, it's much more worth it to go an alternative route. So now to conclude, my favorite parts, or the parts I really like about this game. Again, I talked about the vibe, I talked about, a little bit of, the aesthetic going on here. I really like the music. The emphasis on violin isn't really something you see a lot in games, but whenever it is there, it really makes an impact. For example, the last time I heard violins this impactful in a game was probably when I was playing BioShock 2. On that note, there's also a really cool mechanic in this game where you can trade with that aristocrat society of children different items that you find for different healing items or even, some other stuff too. This trading mechanic was also something cut from BioShock 2. So it's kind of weird that I noticed two similarities there. But yeah, there's one section in particular I really like where you're about the midpoint of the game where you have an option to choose from 3 different storybooks. Each storybook is a different level and you can tackle them in whatever order you really like. Or at least I assume so. I tackled them in a weird order, not in a row or anything like that, and it allowed me to do different levels, so I assume this is something that you could tackle however you like in whatever order. But yeah, I did this one section with the story concerning a mermaid. And all of a sudden, the airship started getting these weird, surreal sections where there would just be fish swimming in the middle of the air, which was like really like not fourth wall breaking, but surreal in a way that like only really Silent Hill will go for. The kind of what is reality sort of thing happening. And this whole section was very straightforward, easy to find the items I needed to move on, no puzzles that roadblocked you, no enemies that I had to like go through a gauntlet for that made me want to rage quit the game. It was a very clean, nice flow. There were interesting visuals, and the boss fight at the end is actually pretty fun. It has you locked in a room with this like mermaid who's tied to the ceiling who gets dropped down. She can either try to swing at you or puke on the floor that creates damage and stun locks you in place. So you have to continuously run around and try to stun lock her when she falls. So you're like rushing to be aggressive, but if you don't get there in time, you need to go on the defensive and run away. And it strikes a really good balance between that. And while the design is really freaky, the mermaid literally shouts "Hiya" when she falls like this. So I actually had a good chuckle playing this. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite part of the game. Now, in regards to what I don't like, it's the entire final section. Now, as you start getting close to it, there's an entire chapter called like the Sewing Princess or something like that. And it is just fucking awful. It doesn't need to be in the game. You had that wonderful section with the 3 optional storybooks, then you're on the airship again, in the most boring dark area, forced into combat arena after combat arena, after having to do this thing that has you go back and forth between the entire airship to start up the power while really annoying stunlocky enemies just shred you apart. You have another gauntlet in this area here, and it's just like painful. I had to like run all the way back to the beginning of the level when I beat an encounter to save the game, so when I inevitably died, I didn't have to deal with having to go through like 3 brutal encounters. So it's brutal gauntlet followed up by a brutal gauntlet, then you get a little bit of like a break in this like orphanage area, but then there's another brutal gauntlet, and then you get to like the final area with the final boss, and that's much better. But you have like the entire 3rd act of the game, which is just brutal to get through and kills the amazing pacing and vibes of the entire first 2 acts. So I really hate this. I don't even have an issue with the fact that the combat is very like janky and like back and forthy sort of thing. I mean, there's a little more strategy than Silent Hill 3 because you have to like move around the enemies sort of thing, but it's not very... Yeah, the hitboxes are trash, but that doesn't even bother me. What bothers me is when I have to interact with that in a way where it just feels really unfair if I didn't spend 3 hours grinding for every little health item. So it's incredibly gatekeepy. I have not had an encounter that's this soft locky since Resident Evil 3 1999. But yeah, in conclusion, this is definitely a really fun game that has amazing vibes, it has some amazing levels, and the story. I will make a separate video in the future breaking down the story of this game, because it's on the same level of Silent Hill 2. I know like the whole series right now we're comparing and contrasting to Silent Hill 3 and Haunting Ground, but like this is a story of that caliber. Definitely try to emulate this, definitely try to experience this. If you get frustrated with it, I don't blame you. I'm going to be making that video talking about the story, which again is the best part. I hope you guys enjoyed. Over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.